5 Şubat Dünya Keşmir Günü'nde Keşmir Kader Mi konulu belgeselimizle karşınızdayız. Bu belgeselimizde konuşmacılarımızla birlikte Keşmir'de yaşananları inceleyeceğiz.
The Pakistanis and Kashmiris all over world celebrate 5th February as Solidarity Day. This day is celebrated to commemorate the sacrifices which have been made by Kashmiris to win liberty and freedom from Indian occupation.
Dil, din, kültür, ülkü ve toprak birliği bir devletin devlet olmasını sağlayan 5 etmendir. Devletler bulundukları konumlardan fiziki ve coğrafi özellikler kazanır. Bu 5 etmen de bu özelliklerin içerisinde yer alır. Kazanılan özellikler sonucu devletlerin jeopolitiği ortaya çıkar ve bu durum bize coğrafyanın bölgeler üzerindeki etkisel önemini gösterir. Jeopolitik karmaşık olmasına karşın bir devletin bütün unsurlarını kapsayan bütüncül bir durumdur. Güney Asya coğrafyası da tarihin eski dönemlerinden itibaren karşımıza bu durumun etkilerini yaşayan bir yapıda olarak karşımıza çıkar. Tam bir kültür mozaiği olan Güney Asya, jeopolitik önemi nedeniyle tarih boyunca büyük devletlerin ilgi alanı olmuş ve bölgedeki hegemonya mücadelesi günümüze kadar sürmüştür. Gelecekte de coğrafi faktörlerin etkisiyle bu durum daha da artacaktır. 1940'lı yıllarda İngilizlerin bölgeden çekilmesiyle kırılımı yaşanan bölge jeopolitiği, ulusların birbirleriyle mücadele süreçlerinde değişim sürecine girmiş, oluşumdaki yapaylığın sonuçları neticesinde hızlanma yaşamış ve bu değişim bölgede etkilerini hissettirmeye başlamıştır. Bölgenin iki önemli gücü olan Hindistan ve Pakistan, İngiltere'nin bölgeden çekilmesi üzerine dinsel farklılıkları ile birbirinden ayrışmış farklı ülkeler olarak kurulmuştur. Bu iki ülke, ulus inşa aşamalarında çeşitli sorunlar yaşasa da zaman içinde sorunların büyük çoğunluğunu çözmüştür. Ancak Keşmir meselesinde birbirleriyle çatışma içerisindedirler. Halen çözülemeyen bu sorun bölge jeopolitiğinde önemli bir rol üstlenmektedir.
Kashmir is important in the multiple ways. First and foremost, it's a geopolitical pivot of the Asian continent, basically in South Asia, where mountain meet, where glaciers come into open and provide a lot of water to both India and Pakistan. It's adjoining to China, the great power, and overlooking the Himalayas. It's a very important place on this part of the world, and especially the South Asian continent, subcontinent, India and Pakistan. It's a lifeline for water, for electricity, and for natural beauty.
We share borders with three nuclear powers: India, Pakistan, and China. As you know and I know, India is fighting with China on one side. India is fighting with Pakistan on the other. That makes Kashmir the most dangerous place on earth. Why we need to talk about issue of Kashmir? As you know, there are more than 100 international conflicts. But Kashmir has two particular uniqueness which no other international conflict has. Number one, Kashmir is the only international issue where the solution of the problem was suggested by the parties themselves. It was suggested by India that the people of Kashmir need to be given the right to decide their future, and it was accepted by Pakistan. There is no other international conflict where the solution was suggested by the parties themselves. And second unique feature of Kashmir, which is unfortunately very dangerous, and that is Kashmir is the only region in the world.
Şimdi hep beraber tarihsel süreçle birlikte konuyu ele alalım. Keşmir sorunu 1947 yılında İngiltere'nin bölgeden çekilmesiyle başlamıştır. Nüfuslarının %90'ı Müslüman olan halk aynı yıl Pakistan'a katılma kararı alsa da prenslerinin Hindistan'a katılma kararı almasıyla karşı karşıya kaldı.
How is Kashmir important to the politics of India and Pakistan is at the heart of their relationship. And it has been so ever since 1947. I think it's very important for the future generations to understand how the dispute over what was the former princely state of Jammu and Kashmir originated during the time of the partition of the subcontinent. And tragically, as we've seen, the issue has dominated their relationship ever since then for 75 years, over 75 years now. They have been unable to resolve the dispute which arose at the time of partition.
The issue of Kashmir goes back to 1947, when the British Empire came to an end in the Indian subcontinent, and India and Pakistan became two independent countries. Remember, the India-Pakistan independence was based on two-nation theory, and that was Muslims and non-Muslims. And a majority of the Jammu and Kashmir state were Muslims, and therefore it was almost certain that this state will go to Pakistan. But the Maharaja at the time, who was not Muslim, could not make a decision which way he wanted to go, and that delayed the decision of accession before 14th of August, and Maharaja was undecided.
When the people of the Muslim majority state of Jammu and Kashmir were deprived of this fundamental right of self-determination during the partition of the Indian subcontinent, then the Muslims of the state decided to start an armed freedom struggle against the autocratic ruler of the state.
Hence, the Kashmiri people took up arms against the Maharaja, and 1/3 of Jammu and Kashmir state was liberated from Maharaja's forces when apparently India claims, although there is no evidence to show, that Maharaja signed an instrument of accession with India and asked India's help.
1947 yılında ilk savaş başladı. Savaşın sona ermesi için Birleşmiş Milletler devreye girmek zorunda kaldı ve referandum şartıyla ateşkes sağlandı. Savaş sonunda Pakistan Keşmir'in küçük bir bölümünü ele geçirirken Keşmir'in büyük çoğunluğu Hindistan'da kaldı. Hindistan 1950 yılında anayasasına 370. maddeyi ekleyerek Cemmu Keşmir'i özel statülü bir devlet olarak tanıdı. Bu statüyle Keşmir, dışişleri ve savunma alanlarında Hindistan'a bağlı, diğer konularda kendi anayasasına ve bayrağına sahip olacaktı. 1962 yılında Hindistan Çin ile savaştı ve Keşmir'e bağlı olan Aksai Çin bölgesini Çin'e karşı kaybetti. Bu savaş Çin'i de meselenin içine katmış oldu. 1963 yılında Çin açısından Hindistan'a karşı stratejik üstünlük oluşturan, Hindistan'ın kendi toprağı olduğunu iddia ettiği Keşmir'in Karakum bölgesini Pakistan Çin'e devretti.
75 years ago, without any legal justification, India forcibly landed troops and took control of the state of Jammu and Kashmir against the will of its people.
The people of Jammu and Kashmir and Mujahideen and freedom fighters, they started their struggle and they defeated Indian forces and they got liberated 1/3 of Kashmir. That is called Azad Jammu and Kashmir. The families who migrated in 1947 and they got settled in different parts of Pakistan. Now those families have more than 3 million population scattering different parts of Pakistan and Azad Jammu and Kashmir.
Since then, in the aftermath of the Kashmiri insurgency against Indian occupation and the first Pakistan-India war over Kashmir, the Security Council decided that the final disposition of the state of Jammu and Kashmir would be made through a plebiscite held under UN auspices to enable the people of Jammu and Kashmir to exercise their right to self-determination and to decide whether they would accede to India or Pakistan. India accepted this decision of the Security Council. But since then, it has averted and avoided implementation of this decision through recourse to both fraud and force. The Kashmiri resistance to India's occupation has been consistent and courageous.
So the heart is actually the former princely state, and it is both a territorial dispute and a dispute about the rights of individuals to have their what they call self-determination. And this is where it's become very difficult.
First, every colonial power's objective is to erase the memory of the colonized and to make unity impossible, to confuse, to confound, especially the indigenous population, but also the world, in order to stifle the ever-present threat of resistance. Colonizers are by their very nature insecure, since everyone deep inside knows the crimes they've committed. They understand the natural laws of justice are bound to catch up to them eventually. Such is the situation in the disputed territory of Jammu and Kashmir, where the Indian government has made every effort to erase, obfuscate, and miseducate the indigenous people to rationalize their occupation.
Same kind of parallel experience occurred in Palestine, where the UN, in a sense, followed the British Mandate experience, which had been operative between World War I and the end of World War II, and was quasi-colonial in nature, and ended, as did the situation in India, with a partition that victimized the Palestinian people. One should hold Britain partly accountable for these two tragedies because often when they departed from their colonial possessions, they left behind a divided society that they had manipulated in a divide and rule strategy of colonial administration. And so Ireland and Cyprus, among other places, are examples of where this kind of decolonization led not to liberation, but to a new form of oppressive rule. And what was ignored in this process was international law, which called for the self-determination of peoples. In each case, there was a special status. Kashmir was a so-called princely state that by the terms of partition was supposed to be able to choose whether it would affiliate with Pakistan or India. But India never allowed this choice to be made.
After the December 1989 massacre in Srinagar, the Kashmiri people rose in popular revolt against India. And India's oppressive response to their call for freedom resulted in the death of over 100,000 Kashmiris, men, women, and children.
And when people of Kashmir rose in 1990, as they believed that India is not honest in her intentions to hold this plebiscite, and the peaceful resistance was met with severe human rights violations. And it continued, and as a matter of fact, till 2010 or 12, about 130,000 people were killed.
Keşmir halkının tüm siyasi bileşenleri bir araya geldi ve tüm taraflar Hürriyet Konferansı'nı kurarak bu sorunu diplomasi ve siyaset kanalı ile çözme yolunu tercih etti.
All Parties Hurriyet Conference is a conglomerate of various organizations striving for the right of self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. The All Parties Hurriyat Conference is recognized by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation as a true representative of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. The Hurriyat Conference believes that Jammu and Kashmir is not a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan, but an international issue which is still in the United Nations Security Council. The Hurriyat Conference also believes that the only way to resolve the issue of Jammu and Kashmir is the implementation of the relevant UN Security Council resolutions and the resolutions of United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan.
6 Ağustos 2019 tarihlerine geldiğimizde Keşmirlilerin karşısına yeni bir sorun çıkmıştı. Hindistan aldığı kararla Keşmir'in özel statüsünü kaldırarak bölgeyi Cemmu Keşmir Birlik Toprağı ve Ladakh Toprağı olarak ikiye ayırdı.
United Nations Security Council had passed resolution for plebiscite in Indian-held Kashmir. The resolutions state that Kashmiris are to decide which side do they want to go. But on 5th August 2019, India abrogated its own constitution and changed it and usurped the right of the Kashmiris there, usurped the rights of Kashmiris living in their occupation, and their status was changed.
On August 5, 2019, Government of India abrogated Article 370 and 35A of its constitution to revocate the autonomous status of Jammu and Kashmir. Article 370 was only a symbolic article which dealt with defense, communication, and foreign affairs, which they also abrogated eventually with regard to Kashmir. Article 35 was to preserve Kashmir identity. It was adopted by the J&K Assembly on November 17, 1956. It was vested with the power to define the resident status of Kashmiri citizen. The legal entitlement also allowed Kashmiris to hold immobile property, and including land and other immobile properties. Revocation of the article therefore opened the floodgates of Indian settlers into Kashmir. It changed the demographic status. With the demographic flooding, more Indians came than there were ever in Kashmir. It was aimed at diluting our ethnic identity and our religious makeup. It was the tipping point of our history. They also passed Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act of 2019 to change the Kashmir's composition. They broke Kashmir up, part into Ladakh and part was left as Jammu and Kashmir. They also did redistricting and electoral gerrymandering with which they are going to manipulate the elections in Kashmir and affect the outcome. They have given 2.5 million Hindus at one time from India the right to vote in Kashmir and given them the state subject certificate.
The idea is that convert a Muslim majority area into minority, so that in the long run, when plebiscite is being held, the decision is in favor of India, so that they can tell the world we have held a plebiscite and people of Kashmir have decided to stay with India.
Hindistan'ın aldığı karar sonrası Keşmir'de Müslüman halka karşı yaptığı uygulamalar, taraflı tarafsız herkesi bu meseleye karşı bir şekilde harekete geçirecek cinsten uygulamalardı. Ancak uluslararası toplum her zaman olduğu gibi gerekli rolü üstlenmekten, üstlense de uygulamaktan kaçındı. Şimdi 2019'dan sonra Keşmir'de yaşananlara hep birlikte bakalım.
Large-scale usage of violence in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir has been a persistent and a dominant feature of India's imperial state policy. The consequences and impacts of this reckless state violence on Kashmiri society, politics, and culture has been vastly underestimated.
Since 5 August 2019, India has intensified its attempt to impose what its leaders now call a final solution for Jammu and Kashmir. India's policies and actions in occupied Jammu and Kashmir today consist of, firstly, a massive oppressive response. It has deployed 900,000 troops in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. It is the densest occupation in history, with 1 soldier for every 8 Kashmiri man, woman, and children. This massive occupying force is perpetrating a vicious campaign of repressive action, including extrajudicial killings of innocent Kashmiris, in fake encounters, custodial killings, cordon and search operations, and enforced disappearances where 15,000 Kashmiri youth have been abducted and have been subjected to torture and incarceration.
Well, it's not resolved because the Indian government refuses to resolve it, because the Indian government has for decades now trying to incorporate Kashmir into a greater India. And because they insist on this policy, the people of Kashmir has been suffering. Now, let's remember that there are almost 1 million soldiers in Kashmir today. What are these 1 million soldiers doing? They are preventing Kashmiris, the people of Kashmir, from being able to live as normal citizens. They are under constant military rule. When you have 1 million people throughout Kashmir ruling them, that means they are ruling every single day, every single moment, the life of Kashmiris. And they are doing, that's why the problem is festering. That's why the problem continues to exist.
There are now in Indian occupied Kashmir nearly 1 million troops. There's 1 soldier for 8 people. There are thousands of human rights abuses and cases documented, where we're including rape as a weapon of war. Unfortunately, access is restricted to the area. Amnesty International have been closed down, and India are not allowing anybody in to see.
Internet is not allowed to operate in Indian controlled, Indian occupied territory. The media men's lips are stitched so that they will promote only version, that is the Indian version. Hence, in this context, the role of global community is very much important to bring the true voices, the voices of the victims. The victims are the Indian occupied Kashmiri people who are true honor of their soil, to their land. They must be given the voice internationally, and global community will play a vital and important role in it.
Media in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir is facing worst kind of repression in its history. In fact, Kashmir media is virtually under siege. There is no space for print and electronic media to freely work in Jammu and Kashmir. Similarly, almost all English and Urdu publications have been told that either they fall in line or face the state wrath. So similarly, the state is traditionally state has been controlling the advertisement, which is the one of the major source of income for the newspapers and electronic media.
Hindistan'ın medyaya uyguladığı baskıyı muhataplarından dinledik. Medyada karşımıza baskıyla çıkan Hindistan, Sinema sektöründe ise bambaşka bir stratejiyle karşımıza çıkıyor.
When the British left the subcontinent, it was an understanding that freedom and sovereignty had finally been achieved by the populations that existed in that part of the world. But sadly, that was not to be the case. Coming to our topic, cinema as a tool for propaganda has been used for almost as old as cinema itself, mainly by the Nazi regime in Germany. Cinema in India is considered as a religion itself. It's in the day-to-day discourse, the experiences, the dialogues, the narratives, the music. It's almost considered as free-flowing as blood in the Indian society. Kashmir basically comes into the framework of Indian cinema and Bollywood very early, around the mid-60s, with a few movies. But then, back then, the narrative of Kashmir was to be discussed as the value of romance. Leading actors and actresses would just go to Kashmir, the valley of Kashmir, to film Bollywood songs and depict the natural, serene beauty of the valley itself. Kashmir was depicted as the valley of peaceful people, the home of peaceful people, a place with a lot of color, culture, and history. But however, during the later part of the 20th century, due to the initial periods of the Kashmiri insurgency against the writ of the Indian state in Indian occupied Kashmir, the narrative started changing slowly but surely. The first incident that we actually record in terms of Bollywood depicting Kashmir in a negative light is in 1992 with the production of the movie Roja. And that was basically the initial start towards a rather systematic degradation of Kashmir and its people through cinema as a tool of propaganda. 4 of the top grossing ever movies made in Bollywood were actually anti-Kashmir and anti-Muslim.
Bölgede uygulanan baskı, uluslararası topluma karşı gerek medya, gerek sinema sektörüyle perdelenmeye çalışılsa da yaşananlar netti. Tüm bunlardan etkilenen ise bölge halkından başkası değildi.
Particularly, the sexual violence being leveraged as a weapon of war by the Indian forces in the region has been grossly overlooked at the international level. Despite growing awareness of an urgent need to empower women in the conflict hit areas such as Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, where prolonged Indian military occupation, massive troops build-up, and sprawling military camps stretched across cities, towns, and villages had created a fertile ground for violence against women. Being a vulnerable part of the society, the Kashmiri women have unfortunately been the worst victim of this long-drawn, unresolved dispute, which is the longest unresolved dispute in the human history on the agenda of United Nations. That has left behind a harrowing legacy in the person of rape victims, widows, and half-widows.
Indian occupied Kashmir is a story of misery and conflict. India's forces have been inflicting pain on men and women. I will specifically be talking about the women over there. Now what happens is that in conflict zones, men are killed, women are not. But what happens to women? Women are raped and then they're raped again. So this abuse of power, this abuse of the circumstances that women have to go through is extremely painful. And so a woman does not die one death, but multiple deaths. And that is the pain and misery of the Kashmiri women.
Any of this. Further to this, we see these leaders, Kashmiri leaders, over 200 of them, predominant ones in there, who are part of the struggle, part of the democratic route for Kashmiris to have a voice, for them to have their own solution for the future and for peace. One of those leaders that we see incarcerated is Yassin Malik. Yassin Malik is a democratic voice seeking a resolution of the Kashmir issue through the process of talking In 2008, we saw Yassin Malik speak at the India Conclave, and he reached out and was welcomed onto the stage and be part of a political solution, the talk on what we can hear. Very sadly, you know, these leaders they're silenced and put away.
Hello everybody, I am the wife of one of the topmost Kashmiri resistance peaceful leader fighting peacefully for the right to self-determination in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And sadly, for the past 3.5 years, he is locked up, languishing in a death cell. Along with him, many other Kashmiri resistance leaders are languishing in various jails of India. And it's a tragedy that my husband was not given a fair trial in any of the fictitious charges and cases filed against him. It's a black justice system there where he's not being produced. He is locked up in a death cell, and his name is Yassin Malik. And he is the face of a peaceful solution, peaceful resistance. And it's not a crime to ask for freedom, especially for a nation which has over a dozen pending UN Security Council resolutions, which mandate that Kashmiris have a right to decide their future and be given that right. But unfortunately, till date, the world does recognize our conflict, the dispute, but no proper action has been taken against India. Only complaints, only reports, only condemnations.
Tüm bu yaşananlar akla, uluslararası hukukun bu konudaki rolünün ve uygulayıcılığının ne olduğunu akla getiriyor.
Human rights abuses persist in Kashmir and against Muslims in wider India, both in practice and through the Indian legal system. Legislation in India, including laws like the Armed Forces Special Powers Act and the Public Safety Act, are violative of international law. The situation in Kashmir breaches both domestic and international law. India's domestic laws shelter rather than punish those who violate international law in the occupied region. India has been in blatant violation of international law with regards to actions in Kashmir. Multiple international legal instruments have been breached by India, such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which states that people enjoy a wide variety of human rights, including but not limited to the freedom of expression and the freedom of life and dignity. What the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights also says that people have to enjoy the right to life even in times of armed conflict and even in times of occupation.
The connection between international law and the oppressive occupations and resulting suffering of Kashmiris and Palestinians is one of the great tragedies of the past century. And the tragedy occurred in part because it was under the shadow of very powerful historical forces. In the case of Kashmir, the British decolonization coupled with the partition of India caused a great deal of turmoil in the country. Again, a questionable arrangement from the perspective of international law. So both Kashmiris and Palestinians have suffered greatly for almost a century under the oppressive conditions of a post-colonial historical period. And international law has not been able to neutralize the geopolitics which in India's case has allowed it to remain the administrator and ruler of Kashmir, and in the Israeli case to have pushed the Palestinians further and further from their own country and dispossessed a substantial number who have lived in refugee camps for decades.
Filistin'de de, Keşmir'de de yaşananlar, devlet oluşum süreci etmenlerinden dinin farklı olmasının bölge fark etmeksizin nelere yol açabileceğinin en net göstergesi olarak karşımıza çıkıyor.
It is not the issue of a Muslim, it is an issue of the humanity, and we should, in our all way, lend the hand to the people, oppressed people of Kashmir, as international community is doing for the people of Palestine, because though both of the issues started in 1948, we call it a dual Nakba. It's the same dominant of the people, the British rule, the Indian Pakistan, and have created the problem of occupied Kashmir, exactly the same problem of the Palestinian people. When they exit, they left the people of Palestine in the hand of Israelis, and they created the illegitimate state of Israel. Same happened.
Well, what we have here are two ideologies. These two ideologies are very similar, Zionism and Hindutva. Both rely on the fact that they would like to replace one people with another. So that makes them a racist, supremacist, political ideology that is trying to use settler colonialism to achieve its objectives. And in that regard, both Zionism and Hindutva, these two ideologies, are similar in trying to replace the Palestinians on one hand and the Kashmiris on the other with other people so that they can control the land and the resources in these two territories. First, we need to define our strategic objective. Our strategic objective should be, in the Kashmir case, is that the Kashmiri people have the right to self-determination. They have the right to make the decision what their future is. We cannot sweep the problem under the rug by bringing Hindus into a Kashmiri Muslim land and make them a majority so that they can take over that decision by sheer terror tactics that they are using in order to achieve that objective. So the objective is to have the Kashmiri people decide their future. That is the right to self-determination. Because the Indian government has been preventing that from taking place ever since this problem became a political problem in the aftermath of the British withdrawal from India in 1947, even though the Indian government has pledged that that right, that referendum would be given to them. Because that hasn't been done, then the countries of the world, particularly in the Muslim world, must unite in pressuring the Indian government in making this happen and in preventing bringing people who are not from that land to settle that land in a colonial settler policy in order to change the demographics of Kashmir to attain their objective of taking over the land.
In both cases, the challenge of this unlawful treatment of Kashmir has basically not been subject to any kind of meaningful challenge from the Islamic world. And it is something of a scandal given the fact that Islam has always prided itself on being a community of the faithful, an ummah that exceeds the secular boundaries of sovereign states. So to have fallen so far below the threshold of solidarity with the struggle of the Kashmiri people is a comment on the overall wider failure of Islam to take seriously its own pretensions of community and solidarity. I think that that's an important development. The post-colonial period has led to the end of the most obvious cases of colonialism, including India.
Unfortunately, the world powers have turned a blind eye to Indian atrocities. Silence over the killing of Kashmiris is a crime against humanity. Kashmir is the longest unresolved issue in the United Nations, and the UN has failed to implement its resolution on Kashmir. The unresolved Kashmir and Palestine issues are question mark on the credibility of the UN.
Gerek İslam dünyasının, gerek uluslararası toplumun sessizliği çözümü daha da zor hale getiriyor. Vicdan sahibi insanlar ise artık bu işe dur denmesini istiyor. Peki bu nasıl sağlanabilir? Hep birlikte bakalım.
In an era of globalization, entire world is a global village. Therefore, the global society has vital role to play. Number one, to make the world understand that Kashmir is neither a territorial dispute or a bilateral dispute between India and Pakistan. It is neither a successionist movement nor a separatist movement, because the United Nations resolutions bestow the international legitimacy as per international law to the right to self-determination movement of the Kashmir.
So it's my appeal to all of you, for the sake of humanity, for the sake of existence, for the sake of global village, we must stand up for the rights of every creation on this planet, be it human beings, be it animals, be it insects, be it ecology, for everything their rights. But when it comes to Kashmiri people, it's a complete surrender from the world. So please wake up.
So many years, more than 70 years have passed, but the issue of Jammu and Kashmir is still alive, and the people of Jammu and Kashmir have kept this issue alive through their resistance, through their struggle, and the issue shall remain there as long as the valiant people of Jammu and Kashmir do not lose hope. It's high time that the United Nations plays its role, and the people who have conscience, who believe in fair play and justice, they should come forward and help the people of Jammu and Kashmir to achieve their goal of self-determination. Any talks between India and Pakistan will not resolve the issue, because that is what the people have already seen for years together. There have been talks between India and Pakistan, but the issue is still there.
The United Nations Charter is held supreme, and that is how the United Nations Security Council resolutions are still intact. We'll stand by them, and we urge the media, the international community, the West, the human rights activists to raise their voice and expose Indian atrocities which are being perpetrated in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir.
Pakistan has continued and will continue to press for an end to Indian occupation and the resolution of the dispute on the basis of the decision of the Security Council to enable the people of Jammu and Kashmir to exercise their right to self-determination. This is the only legal and justified modality for the resolution of the dispute over Jammu and Kashmir. There is no other legal basis for its resolution. But to move towards that end, we need, in the first instance, to develop and implement an effective strategy to counter the Indian strategy of massive oppression, of information blackout, of portraying the Kashmiri struggle as terrorism, and of reversing the unilateral measures taken on 5 August 2019 and the policy of demographic change which India is imposing on Jammu and Kashmir. Pakistan will continue in its efforts to oppose these policies at the international level, in bilateral relations, and at the United Nations.
Let's transform the conflict into a win-win position for both the countries, and then ask the people of Kashmir that what they want. Because until unless you don't give the right of self-determination to the people of Kashmir, it would be unjust. It would not be possible to have a complete peace and prosperity in Kashmir. So therefore, the best thing is let the people of Kashmir to have their say in the final destination of their country, of their territory. Another mechanism is, of course, the role of the diaspora, which is very important. There are millions of Kashmiris living in Europe, living in other parts of the world, where they can play a major role.
Kashmir diaspora has a very important role to play, as there is a need to strategize the movement, keeping in view the constant changing situation geopolitically. In the present world, there is a need of mass awareness. There is a need of an integrated, aggressive campaign in West and the Muslim world. In the West as well as the Muslim world, the perception of human rights violation done by India is there, but the basic reason of that occurring because of the non-implementation of the right of self-determination is not fully realized by these people in these countries. While as the right of self-determination is a universal right, but in our case, it is strengthened by UN Security Council resolutions, which are pending for the last 70 years. This campaign can be led by the Kashmir diaspora.
Under this banner, all the political and religious parties are united for the right of self-determination, and we usually meet together and chart out a common program to highlight this issue at international and national level, and off and on our programs continue. So we are determined that inshallah our people living in this side, and we have 1.5 billion our brothers and sisters who are living in UK and Europe and America and other parts of the world as diaspora. Alhamdulillah, they are part of our movement, and they are very active at the international front as the diplomatic front. They mobilize community. We have representative in House of Commons, House of Lords, in United Kingdom, and we have representation in European Parliament also, and our brothers in America and different parts of the world. Alhamdulillah, they are working at their best. They are trying to highlight and mobilize international community.
Today, a new consciousness has emerged amongst the people of the disputed territory of Kashmir, inside the occupied territories and throughout the globe. And on this day, we celebrate that reawakening, that reemergence of national pride and consciousness that is so essential for freedom. People must know who their enemies are. They must also trust one another and break the walls of mistrust between each other. The future, dear friends, is full of hope and bright. Our work continues, and as more and more countries join our struggle, as more people become aware of the reality of what is happening in the disputed territory, then together we shall break the shackles of slavery and tear down the walls of oppression.
Bölgesel olarak güç teşkil eden ülkelerin sahip olduğu stratejik unsurları vardır. Bu unsurların olası kaybı ülkeler için yıkıcı etkilere sebep olabilmektedir. Coğrafya her ne kadar kader olarak lanse edilse de bu alanların kaybı ile kader kendiliğinden beraberinize gelmektedir. Keşmir'in kaybı ile alt yıkımı meydana gelebilecek olan Pakistan ile olası su kesiminde büyük sorunlar yaşayabilecek, günden güne daha da güçlenen Hindistan arasında yaşanan bu sorunun çözülememesi, bölge kaderi açısından günden güne olumsuz yönde seyir edecektir. Bölgenin var olan nüfus yoğunluğu göz önüne alındığında, yaşanacak olan olası her kötü senaryonun etkilerinin küresel bir tesir edeceği açıkça ortadadır. Oluşturulacak diplomasi mekanizması ile coğrafi gerçekler baz alınarak bu sorunun çözülmesi bölge için en ideal sonuç olacaktır. Ayrıca uluslararası toplumun alacağı reaksiyonlar ile bölgede yaşanan zulmü ortadan kaldıracak adımlar atması gerekmektedir. Bu adımların uygulayıcılığının olması ise sorunu daha da hafifletecektir.
When India and Pakistan are going to talk about the issue of Kashmir, the people of Kashmir need to be the part of talks. You and I, and those who are concerned with the human rights situation in Kashmir, we need to ask Secretary General of United Nations. You have the power. Intervene in Kashmir. Bring India and Pakistan and the Kashmiri leadership together and settle the issue of Kashmir once for all. As you know, that South Asia is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka and whatnot. It is 1.5 billion people. When Kashmir issue is going to be resolved, it is definitely going to bring peace to Kashmir. But more importantly, it is going to bring peace, prosperity, and joy to the whole region of South Asia, which is 1.5 billion people, which is 1/5 of total human race.